It's time for the Sue Ellen Sanders radio program on WPSL Digital 1590. Opinions expressed are those of the program host and guest and not those of WPSL. WPSL does not endorse products that may be mentioned. Any reproduction or retransmission of this broadcast is strictly prohibited without written consent of WPSL. Now, here's Sue Ellen Sanders.
Thank you for joining us. I'm so excited to have here in the studio today somebody who is, I don't like to call people old friends because then it makes them sound like they're old as an elderly. And Wendy certainly is not an old friend, but she is a longtime friend. As a matter of fact, one of the first people I met here in St. Lucie County that was in my field, and Wendy Dwyer and I go back to the days when she worked for the United Way of St. Lucie County, and my husband and I were campaign co-chairs, and I met this woman who had crazy ideas about things. And I thought, I want to be like her when I grow up. But nothing Wendy did, she did in an ordinary way. And that was one of the things I liked best about you. I think that's why we got along so well. Everything was out of the box and crazy. And since those years, and that 20-something.
2002? 2002?
Yeah.
2002.
Yeah. Yeah, so 18 years. No, 16 years. Is that possible? Yes.
Yeah.
No.
Chloe was just a baby. It was, I think 2002 was when I started
knew you before. No, because we were United Way co-chairs before I had kids, I think.
No, I don't think so.
No?
Because I didn't come here till I was in New York till end of 2001.
That won't work then.
I think I started at United Way end of 2002, like September. Okay. And I think that was the year you guys were co-chairs.
Yeah. That sounds about right. So, anyhow, that's still like a 17, 18-year friendship. And, there have been a lot of times where we popped up in each other's lives for different reasons. And when I started doing this radio show 17 years ago, she was probably one of the first guests I had on. And, first, whatever company she was working for, or when she started her own public relations company, she would come and talk about different clients or different companies. And she, basically one thing you can say about Wendy is that she can probably talk about anything, anytime, anywhere.
Because my husband doesn't think that's a compliment.
And he is so wrong. So anyhow, she is here today as the author of a book called How to Turn Crappy Jobs into Career Goal Asshats to Asshats. You've got to say that carefully.
Yes, you do have to say that carefully. But you just nailed it.
Yes. Well, thank you. And she is actually assistant professor at Indian River State College, where she teaches English classes. And so she and I think we both went into teaching around the same time, too.
I think so, yeah.
And so we've shared a lot of knowledge about that, or a lot of stories about that, I might say. And she's come and been guest reader in my classrooms before and brought the kids, whether they were little kids or big kids, she always brought something different and something special. And but deep down at heart, Wendy has always been a writer. That's what you've done, and that's the constant that's been through your life.
Yeah.
You've been a writer. And as a writer, I remember having lunch with you a few years ago, maybe more than a few years ago. We both sat there and said, I want to write a book.
Yeah.
And, every writer says that, but not every writer does that.
Yeah.
And so you, what's the expression, took the bull by the horns.
Yeah, or something like that, yeah.
And wrote your book and published it. And I'm so proud of
God,
you.
I'm so excited about it. And I have to say, you're right. I think that there's something about all of us that, and it's been something that's been a constant common thread for you and I, is that we always return to the writing. And I think there's something about that that's, I don't want to say it's sacred, but it's part of the what runs through our veins. Some people are born to do one thing or born to do another. And I think there's something about us that we have to write. We have stories to share.
And we've all, both of us, and probably every writer out there, have done a lot of different kinds of writing over the years.
Some of which we are not very proud.
I know. Sometimes you have to write what they tell you to write, despite what your misgivings are. Sometimes you have to write what's in your heart and soul. Sometimes you're creative. Sometimes you're writing poetry. Sometimes, with today's world where there's blogs out there, there's you can become an internet sensation overnight with not just singing into the mic, but the words that you publish. Right. And so there's a lot of stuff out there, but I am of a generation that I like to touch what I read.
I think we surprisingly, I think most of us are. I've been doing some reading on it, and I think I mentioned it, we've talked about it recently, that we're much more tactile than we believe, and even what we remember is something that we've had some physical connection with. So as wonderful as our devices are, our laptops, our phones, we remember more when we write it down or when we hold it in our hands. And so I think that's why, for me, it was not only important to get a book that I could publish electronically, but something that we could actually touch. And I know, because that's something that we talked about even in our text back and forth, was, bring a hard copy. There's something about that that's different.
And I think I'm going to use the kids today line because it's early in the show and it's time to use it. Kids today don't appreciate reading, partly because of the way they read and because they're, Miss Sanders, can I read my book on my phone? No, you can't read your book on your phone. Get a book and read it. And then there's websites out there. There's Thrift Books, which is not endorsed by this show or by me, but you can get almost any book for like $3.79. So you can get some great deals on books. And not only do I like to touch a book, but I like to own a book, which drives my husband crazy.
No, I know, the same thing. It's funny because I did some major cleaning this summer, and with the intention, I went through my library thinking I am just going to purge and clear stuff out, and I couldn't do it. I had no trouble.
Are our friends.
Yes, but now I had no trouble going through my husband's closet and purging the heck out of that.
Yeah.
And, he came home and, felt like he'd been thrown out because it was so empty.
Because there's a pile in the yard?
Oh, no, it was way beyond where he could get to it.
That's a good idea.
But the books I couldn't get rid of. And that I think
my
speaks
favorite
to where
books,
we are.
my favorite authors, and this is terrible. This is a guilty pleasure. But I'll go to thrift stores and garage sales, and even if I already own the book, if it's my favorite book or one of a list of my favorite books, I'll buy another copy of it so I could give it to somebody else. So when they say, "Do you have a book that I could read?" I can say, here's this book. I loved it. Keep it.
I have started doing that. We do a writing group every month, and I have started buying any book that I like that I would endorse or encourage the others to read. I noticed that I've started going online and buying used copies of them, and so that, when someone says, "Can I borrow it?" You know what? No, you can have it. It's much easier for me to give it to you than to feel like I'm loaning my best friend out, and I don't care if I get them back or not, because I do.
You're also spreading the love, and the whole thing, is, passing, when you're paying for somebody's coffee at McDonald's, this is just another way. We are literary animals, and this is just another way of us spreading the love. So instead of giving people chocolate or flowers, we give books.
I think that's a wonderful idea. So we give the gift of words. We hit them with a few words.
And that being said, how to turn crappy jobs into career gold is a book available on Amazon. It's written by our own Wendy Dwyer, and it's a book that is something that you could probably use as a gift for a whole slew of people in your life, or holidays. But for the student who is going away to college, to make them feel good about working all the crappy jobs that they're working along the way.
We all do.
Or a high school student, or someone who's graduating for the first time, or someone who's already been in a dozen crappy jobs and is now in a job they like, and you want to remind them that all those crappy jobs helped them get there.
Yeah, it's funny, on the way over here today, part of the reason I was a couple minutes late and dashing in was because I was getting messages from someone that I don't see that often who had picked up a copy of the book, someone close in age to me, younger but close in age to me, who sent me a thank you note saying, this was so helpful to me because I am going through a crappy job right now and I am feeling all alone. And it was so nice to see that somebody else has been through, a boss hole too, or someone who, working for someone that isn't kind. And there, when I wrote it, I thought it would be wonderful for students coming out of school, but I think it's just as important for those of us who have had crappy jobs and have lived through them and have taken something good out of them and turned them into, as you call it, lemonade.
Well, here's the thing is that every time in life, as my kids were growing up, they would complain about that kid in class or that kid on the soccer team or in drama or in brownies or somewhere that was just so difficult to get along with. And they couldn't wait until they were out of class or out of school or out of that grade or out of that group so they didn't have to see that person ever again. And I tried to explain that there's always going to be that difficult person, whether they're by the water cooler. You just hope they're not your boss.
Yeah.
That's all you can pray for. But even if they are your boss, to know that the time you're putting in now, you're dealing with, and there's a reason, and you can get some use out of that time that you're putting in. It does make the crappy job, the time period that you're in the crappy job, better. But it also, how do you know you're in a great job unless you've had the experience of the not so great job or the really not so great job.
Right. And lest anybody be confused, it's not all whining. I mean, I hope that when I wrote it, I tried to make the book a celebration of some of the things that were wonderful that came out of jobs that may not have been jobs that I would have wanted to do for the rest of my life. So it's not just one big long, oh my God, and this horrible thing happened, and then this horrible thing happened, and it's really more, I try to instill a little bit of humor, and really in the worst case scenario, if you have gotten nothing else out of the book, you will learn how to make the best powdered hot cocoa that you have ever made in your entire life.
Well, and that is a recommendation that just might get more people out there picking up the book. I love it's one of my favorite types of books, the ones that have recipes in them. So good to know. I didn't get to that yet.
Well, I came upon that recipe, the hard way, because I was dealing with someone who was difficult. I don't know if I can say asshats, but if I can't say it, then Cliff will bleep it out. But I was dealing with
I'll give you a list of words you can't
asshat.
say.
Okay, well, that's how I learned how to make the great cocoa. So something good did come out of the job, and something good came out of every crappy job that I had, even if the really good thing was, saying goodbye and knowing that I had gotten through it. So I hope that that's the way others take it as well.
And from what I've read in the book, and I haven't finished it because school is back, and so I've been reading all the literature that I'm supposed to be teaching, which is really interesting, a step back in time with some classics. But sometimes a crappy job is not a crappy job because of the people that are in it.
Right.
Sometimes that crappy job is just what you're doing or what's happening right then, or how you're doing it, or maybe you're working outside and it's the summertime and that's what made it crappy.
Yeah. And sometimes the crappy is what you put into it. I mean, sometimes it's our own attitude that makes a job crappy. And we've all been there. We've all had jobs that we didn't really want to do. And maybe we weren't the best at them because we weren't engaged. We weren't in love with the job. We didn't feel passionate. And we just needed to move on and get to something that sparked our heart.
And sometimes it's just that the job isn't what you thought it was going to be.
Yeah.
It isn't what you expected. And so your expectations make it hard for the reality to be any good at all because your expectations were so darn great.
Well, and that's part of what drove me to write this in the first place, was because a lot of the students that I deal with on a college level are absolutely positive when I first meet them, and I certainly don't try to change that at all. When I meet them and I ask them what they want to do, they may not know for sure what they want to do, but they know that they want to live in a mansion, they want to have an entourage, and typically it involves sports or reality TV.
Seriously.
And so I think that
and cars.
Well, yes, of course.
Yeah.
That's the limo that drives them around in their entourage. But I think it's that they have such high expectations. And what I notice when I do, and I know you've come to it before, when I do speed communicating and bring in business professionals, is that a lot of students graduate and think that degree is going to put them in a CEO's chair in a corner office right out of the box. And part of that is our fault because we've told our kids they're special snowflakes forever, and they are, but so is every other kid. And so I think that, they get out of school rightfully thinking this is going to be the best job and I'm going to start my perfect life right now at 21 years old, and where is the key to my boat and my palace? And then it's a surprise when you find out when you get to the office that you're the one that has to make the copies.
Plus, everyone doesn't quite understand that when we say you have to go to college to get a good job, or you should go to college to get a good job, that doesn't mean that when you graduate from college you will automatically be handed that job.
Yeah. That's for sure.
And I've got a daughter in the final semester of grad school, and she needs to be sending out resumes, and she's got an internship coming up, and she's thinking that she's going to start worrying about getting a job when she graduates, and it doesn't work like that.
But you know what? I remember being closer to her age, and no one could tell us that either.
Yeah.
And and I know that's doesn't make it a good excuse, but it's hard. Sometimes that hard-won wisdom is the stuff that's the most valuable to us if we don't get what we want right out of the box.
And honestly, the school of hard knocks is a good school too, and that's kind of like the crappy jobs that we collect, and you've kind of just put it into a nice short read if anybody is
2 hours or less.
Or you could, make it last 2 weeks or 2 years by taking it one chapter at a time for what you need, and you can also read it out of order.
That is true. That is true. And my friends will tell you that it does make acceptable bathroom reading as well. So because you can take little bits at a time.
And I like the fact that it's a easy to read format. There's nothing worse than I'm telling you, and I've picked up some of these books lately, like the 11th grade IB kids had to read The Scarlet Letter, and you pick up one of those books, and man, the print is microscopic.
That's funny. I had to listen to that one on audio to remember it from high school because it had been a long time, and I wanted to remember all of it, so I had to go back through and listen to it in audio to make sure that I captured it, because because my attention span has gotten shorter as I've, gotten more tech.
Well, and while Nathaniel Hawthorne is an incredible author who uses symbolism and figurative language, it's not an easy read.
Right.
And not just because of the print, because when your brain is full, putting some of that stuff in there kind of makes you. I'm thinking of that cartoon character that was like going crazy and I can't anymore. I can't do it. So, well, one of the things. So we've just discussed the book, the contents of the book, what's in the book. A lot of the stuff is common sense, but it's the kind of stuff that you need to be reminded about.
It's stuff that I wish somebody had let me know before I felt like I was, sucked into, a quagmire in some jobs. If someone had said to me, somewhere along the line you're going to be able to laugh about having to clean up vomit, maybe I would have not taken it all so personally and felt that it was such a colossal waste of my time, because when I look back on it afterward, yeah, it was a disgusting job, but boy, did I learn some great things at that crappy job.
And, so it really makes the glass half full. I was just wondering how many cliches I could possibly put in this one radio commercial. It's not commercial, it's a radio show, by the way. It's not a commercial for Asshats to
It should
Asshats.
be. It's a great book. You'll
But
love it.
it is
It
a
will
really
make you
good
smart
book.
and pretty. It will make you smart and pretty.
Yeah. However, if you do want to purchase it, you can find it on Amazon.
You can, and I would strongly encourage you, because it doesn't cost you any more to go to smile.amazon.com, and then it will donate to your favorite charity, just a penny or two. But everything that you buy through smile.amazon.com will donate to whatever your favorite charity
Wondered
is.
how that worked,
So,
because
yeah.
they're always asking me, do I want to do that?
Yeah.
But I always say no, because I'm afraid it's going to charge me more.
It doesn't charge you more, and I can't
How
tell
do they
you,
do that?
they don't get a huge amount. They may get a penny per purchase, but if, as many things as we order, especially those of us who love books and order a lot of books, if every book I order gives them a penny, and I order 10 books so I can give one to all my friends, then gosh,
Every little bit counts.
every 10 cents is going to help. So I would strongly encourage you to do it that way. You don't have to, but it doesn't cost any more doing it that way.
How to Turn Crappy Jobs into Career Gold, Asshats to Asshats by Wendy Dwyer is the name of the book. And I find it very interesting and insightful that you self-published this book.
I did.
Because I just have to say, there's a lot of books out there that are published by regular publishing houses that surprise me that they decided to publish the book.
Yeah, and what surprises me also is that there are so many good writers who can't get a foot in the door to publish things, and so it was something that I held off on and wasn't ever sure I was going to be able to do. And I have seen, back in the day it was called vanity publishing. When it first became possible, and there were so many companies that were taking advantage of people who had a story to tell and wanted to tell their story, and I always found that so distasteful. So I really resisted, and I went into this kicking and screaming, and just decided that I am at a certain age, and if I don't do it this way, I'm not going to be able to say the things that I want to say. So for me, it was important to make myself a goal, complete that goal, and follow all the way through. What I like about it is that because I published it myself, although I did have editors, if there was something that I was really strong on and we talked about it, it was my decision in the end. It didn't belong to someone else. So I kind of felt like I had more latitude that way, but I also felt comfortable because it gave me a chance to say things that were important, that I thought were important to my students. Using the word asshat was important to me because that's what my students call someone who has their head so far up their behind that they, they can put their hat on top of their head. Well, you know what I mean.
I gotcha.
Yeah.
I got a
Cliff is
visual.
nodding over
Yes,
there.
I got a
You have a
visualization
visual.
of
I'm
that.
being
Yeah.
very, very careful here.
Thank you. I
Yeah.
appreciate that.
Yeah.
I saw your finger on that button.
But when I say that you did self-publish, I don't want people who are listening to this show to think, or watching the show, sorry, Cliff, to think that it's not professional, because unfortunately, sometimes you do see people who self-publish that they have editorial issues like typos or grammatical errors, or it looks like they've handwritten it, or God help them, they publish the whole thing in Comic Sans.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's funny because the first couple of books that I saw self-published were back when it was Vanity Publishing, and it was shortly after I moved here to Fort Pierce, and I remember sitting with the book group at the library, the writers group at the Fort Pierce Library. I took an afternoon off my job in Palm Beach to go to this writers group, and each person was allowed to read a paragraph from their book to kind of give everybody else a chance to critique it. And this poor woman sat and started to read from her book, and she had made copies for everyone in the room, and her entire book, which was well over 200 pages and was an autobiography of the last few months sitting with her husband as he was dying, the entire book was one long paragraph. So when she started to read, she didn't have anywhere to stop, and it was all one long paragraph. So not only had no one edited it, but when we finally got to ask her a couple of gentle questions, because this was a topic that was dear to her heart, she said that she had paid, I want to say somewhere around $10,000 to get 50 copies of this book, which was all one long paragraph, and I will guarantee you that nobody would even buy that, even at the thrift store book bin, unless they were related to her, and even then, they'd never get through it.
Because
so
even if you just started reading the first, you wouldn't even have to read the words. You looked through and saw that physically it was one long paragraph, and
impossible.
That's something that you and I probably teach a lot in our English classes. That paragraphs make things more readable.
They're like little tiny breaks for our eyes.
Yes, they are. And the best types of, and even short chapters make things more, don't you like bite-sized food? I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah.
don't you like things that are bite-sized, that you can eat, that you can chew, that you can swallow? I mean, sure, every once in a while you want a steak that you have to cut into little pieces, but you're not going to pick up that steak and just chow down and eat the whole thing.
And our lives are so much faster. For me, this was a real exercise in writing in a specific way, writing short chapters, writing short paragraphs. Some of my paragraph breaks, and I had an editor and a proofreader and also a cover designer that I involved in it, who are all wonderful friends and kind people who didn't make me cry. But it was hard for me because sometimes I would want to make a paragraph longer and they would insist that it be a little bit shorter, simply because of the format that it was going into. So while it may not be perfection, for me it was a great learning experience, and it was a great learning experience as a writer.
Well, I know the answer to this question, but I'm going to ask it anyhow so you can share it. But you're an English teacher. Why did you need a proofreader?
Please, you know the answer to
Yes,
this.
I
None of
do.
us can proofread our own stuff.
Exactly.
We are too close to it, and no matter how, I mean, I can remember, in tight situations, I've read my stuff backwards, word by word, in a bathroom somewhere, out loud. I've, done everything, but you still, because you know what you meant to say, you fix it in your head.
You do.
So you don't see the mistake.
And a lot of times you skip whole words, or you skip
Right.
letters because you know what it's supposed to say.
Yeah.
And
So Ann Alexander did a wonderful job proofreading this for me. When she would probably, I don't know if she'd be happy to hear this or not, but she's one of the most anal retentive writers that I know. And so I knew that as soon as I gave it to her, it was in good hands. And I loved that when she came back to me, she she not only gave me the grammatical or typographical errors, but she also gave me a feel for where I needed something, what I needed some help with, or what came off well. So when we finished, I was so afraid of that part of the whole process that I really had hesitated on handing it off to someone else, and she made it so much more comfortable that I would do it again in a heartbeat.
But it's kind of a unique position to be in when you're editing someone's work, and especially when it's personal, like the woman you were talking about who wrote about the last months of her husband's life. And you don't want to have them feel like you're critiquing their experience.
Right.
You're just trying to make them be better. And I have a lot of high school kids that I edit and critique and comment on their college
Sure.
essays. And I don't write them for them. I never write them for them. But sometimes they don't realize how they're coming across in that essay, and they need somebody else other than their mother
Yeah.
to look at it and say, hey, just move this around, change this, leave this out. You don't need to say this, because sometimes you just need another pair of eyes or a few sets of eyes
And your mom
looking at it.
isn't the one, because your mom always sees it from the standpoint of being the one who, birthed you. And you can't do anything wrong in your mom's eyes. So shy of finding one letter wrong somewhere, she just can't, she's not the one to ask to proofread it. You really need to give it to someone else who maybe cares greatly about you, but it doesn't have a blood relation to you.
Well, a lot of people out there, this is the other thing that I find really interesting, and I think I've shared this complaint with you before too. It's not really a complaint as much as an observation. When you tell people at a cocktail party or somewhere where you're meeting them for the first time, you're a writer, or when they say, what do you do? And you say that I'm a writer, or you say whatever else you do, and you're also a writer. And
You
they
should
say,
write my book.
or they say, oh, I'm going to write a book when I'm done practicing architecture,
Yes.
engineering, nursing,
Yes.
doctor, or you should write my book, and you should be happy
Yes.
that
That I give you the
yeah,
opportunity to tell my
write.
story.
Yes, exactly.
I
So-
would do it if I just had the time. That's the other half of that.
yeah. Like my life is so much more.
All I do is sit at home and wait
streamlined,
for
yeah.
someone to tell me, "Oh, write my book."
I really like when you read about the starts of some of our most famous writers, or some of my favorite writers who wrote at 2:00 in the morning
Yeah.
every night for a year, so they could have time between their full-time job
Right.
and raising kids and living their normal life, and then they would just get up and write, or they would set aside time. Most of the writers don't or didn't get their start sitting in front of a computer at 10:00 in the morning, looking out the window and deciding whether they should take the dogs for a walk and think a little bit more about what they're writing, or eat bonbons on the couch
Yeah.
and watch daytime reality TV.
Right. And the ones who did do that, God bless her, the Sylvia Plaths of the world stuck their head in their oven when they turned 35.
Sadly, yes. Some of my favorite books, though, are books that are written by people who began careers in something else, like John Grisham, who, by the way, not to say anything negative about one of my favorite writers of all times, but some of his books are really crappy. Some
I
of
feel
his
that way
later
about Nicholas
books-
Sparks.
Oh, well, Nicholas Sparks is very formulaic.
Yeah.
Yeah, but there's a purpose for his books. I
there
mean,
certainly is.
if you're
There is a
sitting
purpose.
out at the pool and you don't mind getting sweat on the book, or you're getting ready to get on the plane and you keep getting distracted by the noise on the wing and wondering if it was supposed to be making that noise, and you have to read the same paragraph over and over again, then you don't want to be reading something that's too difficult and too deep. And Sparks is great for that. But Grissom usually tells a great story. But he began his career as an attorney, and several of the other authors who also write legal fiction. Is that a genre, legal fiction?
So. I think it might be,
they began their careers as attorneys, or you've got the women who there's a lot of teachers who are still teaching or began their career as teachers. Not like us, who we were writers and then we became teachers.
Got the wrong memo.
Yeah, I know. But if you have a busy life, that doesn't mean that you can't fit writing in, and it doesn't mean you got to set your priorities somewhere.
Yeah. This for me was a real exercise in that, and I did a lot of research ahead of time, and I followed a formula or a template to make sure that I got this done. And
that you weren't going off on tangents too frequently.
I forced myself to write for a certain period of time a day, and now I don't mean a long period of time. I would say I set a goal to write for an hour a day. And beyond that, if I wanted to write more, then I would. But if I didn't want to write more, and most of the time it was not that I didn't want to write, it was that I had other things I had to do. Mm-hmm. So I forced myself to write for an hour a day, and I forced myself to write at least 1,000 words a day. And, because you've been doing it for some time, people at home are going, oh my God, 1,000 words. Our students, oh my God, I'm going to die 1,000 words. But really, it's not that much. And if you've done this, it's not that hard for you to do. And it's not that hard to work up to, because it doesn't have to be 1,000 good words.
Yeah, it just has to be.
It just had to be
1,000 words. And then you can pick and choose out of those words. So how does one get themselves in the habit of doing more frequent writing? You can join one of those writing groups at the library, but a lot of those people have already written books, and they may not be maybe you're not retired and you don't have a lot of time to go at 10 o'clock to a meeting group. You've come up with a kind of plan. You've been doing it for about a year now?
I have. Actually, it's been almost 3 years. I can't believe it.
Good Lord.
Once a month, I do a writing group at Inner Truth Project. And it is a very informal writing group. We do it from 6 to 8 on the second Monday of every month. The initial idea was that there were so many people through the Inner Truth Project that had stories of sexual abuse or sexual molestation or rape to share, that they might want to write their stories, because writing is a form of healing. Unfortunately, very few showed up for that. However, a whole bunch of other people who just wanted to write showed up. Sometimes they wanted to write for themselves. Sometimes they wanted to write just as a gift to themselves, to give themselves a couple of hours of time for themselves.
Sometimes they just wanted to hang with Wendy.
Pretty
and
much, yeah.
Eat chocolate.
Well, because I bring chocolate. I think it's the chocolate, not the me. But yeah, I think that everybody had a different reason for coming, and some of them were really hot on getting their stuff published, and some of them just wanted to come and kind of kickstart their creativity. So every month we get together from 6 to 8 at the Inner Truth Project. We ask everybody to bring a $5 donation, although nobody's ever been turned away, because lots of times we get there and go, oh crap, I forgot my wallet or whatever. Nobody ever gets turned away. It's just 2 hours, and most of the time we either talk about or read what we've written the month before, and I typically send everybody out with some kind of exercise to write up. And if you want to read it, wonderful. If you don't want to read it, that's okay too. Just put a piece of chocolate in your mouth and go, excuse me, just pass. But it works out great, and everybody kind of inspires everybody else.
And it's once a month. It's for 2 hours, and you can write about what you want.
Whatever you want.
And also set aside the time to get started writing. Do you have a lot of people who come there that are writing parts of books, or are they just people who are just kind of writing for the fun of writing?
I would say for the most part, there are probably 4 or 5 who actually want to publish something, and there are probably just as many who just want to write because it unburdens them, it takes something off their heart. And then I think there are probably another 4 or 5 who like having someone give them an assignment. So for example, last month we agreed as a group that for 29 days I had read a book called 29 Gifts. And it was about consciously giving something of yourself, whether it was financial, emotional, spiritual, or just time, once a day to give a gift to someone else and do it consciously. And I didn't really like the book all that much, but I loved the idea. And so I challenged the entire group to do that, and we would do it for 29 days. And the deal was you had to write about it for 10 minutes a day. You had to just write about whatever gift it was so that you could reflect on it and kind of process it in your own mind. If you chose to share, that'd be wonderful. If you didn't choose to share, that was okay too. But the idea was that if we each wrote about it for 29 days, maybe it would kickstart us into writing every day for about 10 minutes. And if you didn't do it, you had to start the 29 days over. That was the impetus to keep us doing it. And I think most of us got through with it. And what was really cool was that although you were giving some form of gift every day, what happened in the end was that what it attracted in you was that you received so much more, so much happiness from giving someone that you didn't know a surprise gift, paying for their coffee, and then being outside when you saw them find out that someone had paid for their coffee. It was a neat way of doing something, and everybody came back inspired and motivated to keep writing.
There are a lot of famous authors or famous people who became authors by accident because they kept some type of journal, and then the journal was published, or somebody read it and went, whoa, this is a journal. And one of the most famous of them, of course, is Anne Frank.
Right.
And when she was writing her kitty, which is what she called her diary, she had no idea that someday after the war, her dad was going to get his hands on that journal and publish it to give us a glimpse of what she dealt with on a day-to-day basis. So, you think upon reading it that the whole book is going to be full of stuff that she had to do without and be without, and it's not. Some of the book is just ordinary
teenage love stories and joyful, and
or spats with her friend or her sister, or thinking that her sister was all that and she was nothing.
Yeah.
All of the ordinary things that turned into a book. And so I really encourage people, if they want to become a writer or if they like to communicate, to keep some type of journal. It doesn't have to be a daily journal, and it shouldn't become work to you. It should be something that's fun. But I try to get kids, especially the high school kids, into the habit of writing, and writing longhand. I don't want them sitting at a computer and writing and then rewriting, because then it doesn't come as natural to them. But to have the kind of writing where sometimes I give them a quote to think about, and sometimes I give them a question to think about. And I came across a couple of my kids' journals that English teachers had required of them years later. And it was so much fun going back and reading what they were thinking at that time.
Yeah, I do that with my students, and I encourage it. And what they found, studies have shown that people who go through some kind of traumatic illness or crime or some situation in their life which is traumatic have a far better response and far better way of dealing with it if they journal, as opposed to those who don't journal. And they tested this on several groups of disparate college students to see what the results would be. And every single time, students who journaled or individuals who journaled had they processed things so much better. And I think that's because you don't hold it in, you don't keep it silent. Once you've put it on paper, you've owned it. you've somehow given it life and let it go.
And of course, my favorite way to communicate is to see people write something in a journal, and that's why I love to use the composition books, because you can't tear the paper out
Right.
without leaving a hole, and then you got to leave the stuff in there.
Mandatory.
Yeah, but if you do have something like that to tell when you're going through a trauma, you don't have to sit at a typewriter or write, especially if you're not able to. There's so many different ways that you can dictate to your computer or to your phone, or get your story down in writing. And I remember just a quick story about a little girl that is now grown up, thankfully, and she was diagnosed with cancer, leukemia, when she was in first grade. And so she went through the whole cancer experience, and which she lost her hair, and it was traumatic for the entire family. And then she was just short of her 5 years when in 5th grade she was diagnosed again with leukemia. And so she was a friend of the family, and I had written several newspaper columns about her along the years, and this time I met her to talk to her, and I was trying to be encouraging, and I said, you should write about your experiences. You should, and I got her a little recorder, and back in those days they had those little mini tapes that went with them, and she looked at me and her eyes filled with tears, and she didn't say this quietly, she said this loudly and angrily. She said, "No, I don't want to remember any of this. I don't. It's somebody else's turn. I already had cancer. I don't want another turn, and I don't want to remember any part of this." And she took the recorder and she just pushed it off the table, and her mom came behind her and said, "I'm sorry." And I said, No, I didn't really think about that. I didn't really think about the fact that while it's happening, isn't the time, while she's in this mode of desperation, may not be the time to do it. But when she's looking back, while it is still fresh in her memory and she remembers some of the stuff, but she's out of the crisis, then maybe, and maybe that, might be a situation for other people too. When you're going through a traumatic event, maybe you don't want to write it down, or maybe it would be dangerous for you to write it down.
Yeah, sure.
So then get to a place where you're feeling a little better, or you're out of the health area of concern, or you're moving towards better things, and then start to journal it and start to write it down while it's fresh in your memory. Sometimes even, I think, sometimes you have to give it a few years.
Yeah. And sometimes there are lots of people, and we've talked about this in our writing group as well, because we're kind of split on this. Some of us keep our journals forever, and there are a couple of us who every New Year's Eve burn our journals. I would die.
So what part of the group I would be.
and I as well.
Yes.
I mean, I have a hard time, and I feel that sometimes that's me having a hard time letting go. But I think that there are some people who feel like they've gotten through it, they've written it, they've put it in paper, they've dealt with it, and they're done with it. So they just burn it and send it up to the heavens. And
I might do that with a wish. I might do that with a paragraph. I just would. For years, years I held on to old writing, and it was so hard to, pack it up and put it away. And there's some stuff that I've thrown out, because, really old diaries from when I was back in the day called junior high school.
Yeah, but I got to tell you, the one thing I miss, my grandma wrote in a diary every day. She never wrote anything earth-shattering, and I know this because sometimes I know she would write stuff in her journal, knowing that after she went to bed, and I would go downstairs and read her journals, because she went to bed at 7 o'clock, for God's sake. And so my cousins and I would sit and read her journals, and she would say, that Wendy and that Vicky are so sneaky. They think that I'm reading their my journals at night, that I won't know they're reading them. And she would leave little notes to us. But
so it was almost communication.
Well, I think it was, but she would document things like the weather. She would tell which of her kids had called her. And to this day, I wish I had her journals more than anything else, because that was such a piece of her that I would like to have held on to and just carried with me forever.
Well, two different types of journals that I had in high school. One year I decided to write things the way I wanted them to be.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of the way they really were. And I came and I came across them and got rid of that journal. And the other thing I came across, I swear I did this for like 2 or 3 years. I had a calendar where I wrote on it every outfit I wore.
Oh,
good
that would be
God.
so cool.
But
that's
at
a
the
book
time,
in itself.
I know. At the time, I threw it away, and now I kind of wish I could go back
are you kidding?
and
That
see
would've
what
been a
that
book.
looked like. That yes. So all different types of subjects you could write about if you choose to write about your life, or you choose to write about somebody else's life, or you try writing about something that is totally fiction. There's the only consistency with all of that is that you just have to take the time to write.
And it doesn't have to be a lot of time. I am a strong advocate of 10 minutes a day. I know that a lot of people try to do yoga or meditate for 10 minutes a day. I encourage writing for 10 minutes a day because I think that it does the same thing. It helps you become centered, and it makes you realize what's important to you, even if what you're writing about is the things you're grateful for that day. To me, what better thing could you do than at the end of the day or at the beginning of the day recognize the things that are important to you, for which you're grateful.
Oh, and letters.
And letters.
Letters.
Oh,
Letters are very cool. And then there's nothing more meaningful than a letter that you wrote somebody, that you actually wrote out the letter. And you know, there's only so you know that people might throw away cards, and they're certainly not going to keep those e-cards. But to be able to hold on to things that are in written form is something that is life-changing. Wendy Dwyer is the author of How to Turn Crappy Jobs into Career Gold, Asshats to Asshats. And you can purchase it on Amazon through smile.amazon.
And just look up Asshats to Asshats.
Yes, and you can actually Google it and find it that way too. And she also has a writing workshop once a month at the Inner Truth Project. If people want to come to the writing workshop, do they have to RSVP for that?
No, unless, of course, if you're going to bring a whole bunch of people, let me know so I have enough chocolate, because that's really the important part.
So which Monday is it coming up?
It's the second Monday, so I think September 11th is the next one.
Okay.
So we'd love to see you.
So we'll come out, perhaps see Wendy there. Thanks for being my guest today.
Thank you, Sue-Ellen. This was a blast.
This was a lot of fun for me as well. You've been listening to the Sue Ellen Sanders Show. I'm here every Saturday at 11:05. We'll see you next week with more.